Greetings and welcome to Word Magazine. This is Jeff Riddle. I'm the pastor of Christ Reformed Baptist Church in Louisa, Virginia. It's been a little while since I've done one of these Word Magazines. It's actually been about 2 months. I just had a lot of things happening over the summer, a lot of ministry events and some travel. And I'm getting back in the groove. One of the things that sort of occupied a lot of my time over the last couple of months was preparation for the Reformation Bible Society conference that took place last Saturday, August the 3rd of 2024, the inaugural Reformation Bible Society meeting. The conference seemed to have gone quite well, very well. We had a nice attendance. We had good presentations. There was a lot of good fellowship and conversation that took place. And actually, a couple of the guys who came to the meeting were asking me, why hasn't there been a Word magazine recently? And so I want to dedicate this episode to Lane and John and to thank them for their encouragement to go ahead and get some more Word magazines out there. Well, this Word magazine was spurred on by an article that came out on this past Wednesday, an online article that showed up on the website for the Institute for New Testament Textual Research, which is the institute or think tank that is housed at the University of Munster in Germany. And they are basically the custodians of the modern critical text of the Greek New Testament. They are the ones who publish the various editions of the so-called Nestle Aland Novum Testamentum Graece, currently in its 28th edition and soon to be in its 29th edition. And this article came out, and I put out a tweet or an X post on my X account about this. Let me just see if I can pull up here on my phone what I wrote when I posted this article. Let's see. I put up this note. I follow the Institute for New Testament Textual Research Twitter account, and I saw this article show up, and I retweeted it. And I said, this article provides valuable insights into the worldview of the contemporary custodians of the modern critical text at the INTF. And then I said, conservative, in scare quotes, reformed and confessional men who have embraced the modern texts and translations should read and thoughtfully consider this article. And then I ended it with a little hashtag modern Texit, indicating I think that it's time to exit for Reformed, confessional, conservative, evangelical men, time to exit the modern text, exit having your text being stewarded by secular think tanks like the INTF at Munster in Germany. And so why did I suggest that this would provide interesting insights for the worldview of the custodians of the modern critical text? Let me pull up the article if we can, and let's walk through it. So the article was written by Greg Paulson and Katie Leggett, and you can see it was posted on August the 7th of 2024. And the title of the article is The Women Behind Your Critical Editions. And so this article is highlighting the fact that now about 50% of the staff that works at this institute, which is the steward of the New Testament text, that half the staff are now women, and they're celebrating this. And so here's a picture of 6 women, and it tells you from left to right, they are Katrin Londefeld, Megan Burnett, Marie-Louise Lohmann, Annette Huffmeier, Dora Panella, and I don't know if it's Katharina or Katarina Sandmeyer. And so here are some of the women who are working on the various critical editions that come out from the INTF. And again, this INTF is sometimes abbreviated or translated for English readers as the Institute for New Testament Textual Research. This is their blog, the INTF blog. And of course, behind the INTF is the actual German name for this institute, which is the Institut für Neutestamentliche Textforschung. And for those of us who are not great with our German, it's nice that it can be translated for us as the Institute for New Testament Textual Research, or the INTF. So what does this article have to say? Why did I say this? It provides an interesting insight into the worldview of the contemporary stewards of the modern critical text. So let's just read through the article. We'll just look at some of it, not all of it. But it starts off, it is well known that the critical editions produced at the INTF in Münster, the Nestle Aland, the UBS Greek New Testament, and the Editio Critica Maior, or ECM, are renowned worldwide and provide the basis for almost all modern New Testament translations around the globe. So they mentioned three things that they're responsible for editing. First of all, as I've already mentioned, the Nestle Aland Novum Testamentum Graece, also the United Bible Society's Greek New Testament. Those two texts, the blue-covered Nestle Aland, if you get it in a hard copy, and the brick red covered UBS Greek New Testament, they are, with respect to text, exactly the same. They have been for the last few decades, and they have a different apparatus. The Nestle Aland has a fuller apparatus. The UBS is a somewhat abbreviated, supposedly making it easier for translators. And they also are the stewards of the ECM, the Editio Critica Maior, which is the major revision of the critical text that is then implemented in the handbooks, the Nestle Aland and the UBS Greek handbooks. But the Editio Critica Maior is much larger, multi-volume for each book, lots of information. And this is also the series that is being influenced by the new coherence-based genealogical method, or the CBGM. And again, their claim is, which they're right, they're not boasting, but it is renowned worldwide and provides the basis for almost all modern New Testament translations around the globe. Which ones does it not provide the basis for? Those based on the traditional text, the TR, like the New King James or the Modern English Version. All the other ones are using the work of the Institute for New Testament Textual Research. They continue. Most will also know that Barbara Aland was the first female director of the INTF, serving from 1983 to 2004. Of course, she was the wife of Kurt Aland. I say Kurt, it looks like Kurt, but Bart Ehrman was fond of correcting James White that it was Kurt Aland. So she was the wife of Kurt Aland, was the director of this institute when it was formed, worked alongside her husband. And they talked about her leaving an indelible legacy on the Institute and the wider field of New Testament textual criticism. In other words, they said, we've had women working here from the very beginning. And now, again, they're going to be announcing that they're so pleased that 50% of the staff now are women. A lesser known fact, however, and one that we are also very proud of, is the fact that INTF's current staff working on these acclaimed critical editions is female. Half of their staff are female, and they are very proud of this. I'm going to offer some evaluation when we get to the end. For now, let's just walk through it a little bit further. So they continue. In this blog spot, we would like to introduce you to some of the highly qualified women behind your critical editions. Through these short interviews, we hope you will get to know them better and see how each of their contributions has a direct impact on the most widely used Greek New Testaments in the world. And when we get to the observations, I'll note that this is so telling of the spirit of this age. This is a great advancement now because half the staff are women. Half of the persons who are the stewards of our modern Bibles and modern Bible translations are women. So they're going to go through each one of these. And again, we'll read some about each one of them. It's kind of, again, like an interview setup as they note, and they walk through a little description of each one of these women and talk about what their role has been with the Institute. The first one of these 5 women is Dr. Marie-Louise Lohmann. And they say, tell us about your academic background and what brought you to the INTF. And she says, after studying classical philology, Greek, Latin, pedagogy at the University of Munster, I began a project called Platonism in Antiquity in 1985, led by Matthias Baltus, which was a comprehensive study of the history of Plato's philosophy in texts and commentaries. And I would just make the point, and this is a theme we're going to see, is that many of these women holding the credentials of PhD, they have a background more in classical ancient literature, in philology of classical ancient Greek. And so her background was in the study of the Platonic works. And then they ask her, if you go down to the next question, what specific projects are you working on at the INTF? How does your work directly affect the critical editions? And she continued. Let me go back before that. I think there was something else. She, in the paragraph before, she said, as a 22-year veteran of the INTF, I'm proud to say I've been at the INTF the longest of the current employees. So she's the senior employee at the INTF. Since I've been part of the INTF for nearly 1/3 of its lifespan, I've had the privilege of seeing numerous fascinating developments in the field of New Testament textual criticism in these 22 years. Throughout my time here, my enthusiasm for textual criticism has continued to grow. The more deeply I engage with the many facets of this field, I greatly enjoy working with the sources of the New Testament, and especially grappling with philological challenges of the text, which require a meticulous and sometimes even detective-like approach. And so this is, I think, something that persons who are in this field of New Testament textual criticism seem especially to enjoy. They enjoy the challenges of doing reconstruction, reconstructing the text and seeking out what they think is closer to the original. Again, they've abandoned now thinking that they can get the autograph, but they think they can get the so-called initial text. And one of the 5 will talk about this. But anyway, the second question is here was they were asked about this scholar, Dr. Lohmann, was asked about what specific projects that she's working on. And she points out that one focus of her work is the transcription and collation of New Testament manuscripts. She notes that this task has remained a constant throughout my tenure at the INTF and is still ongoing. In 2007, I began working on the ECM of the Catholic Letters, which was the continuation of the project first envisioned by Kurt Aland and others in the 1960s. I find that interesting because the CBGM was developed by Gerard Mank in the 21st century, but she says this is just the culmination of what Kurt Aland foresaw in the early days of the Institute. And so if you have a Messel Aland 28th edition, we know that Dr. Lohmann here was instrumental in the work on the Catholic epistles of the ECM that then became incorporated into the Nestle Aland 28th edition, the first of the handbooks to incorporate the fruit of the ECM/CBGM labors. She continues, let's see, as part of the ECM team, I provide transcriptions of selected manuscripts and compile the text critical apparatus of the Greek manuscripts based on these transcriptions. Some of you have heard me often say that indeed the apparatus for the Nestle Aland handbook editions is a treasure trove of information. It's also an amazing testimony to how so much information can be incorporated in such a small space. She continues, this work is carried out verse by verse in 4 stages. First, regularization of the variants. Second, establishing variation units. Third, determining the order of the variants. And 4, post-editing and correcting the apparatus. So she's telling us these are the 4 stages that they work on in this process. She adds, I also worked as co-editor on the ECM Mark and now Matthew, supporting the editorial team. So Dr. Lohmann has been heavily involved in the ECM of the Catholic epistles, ECM of Mark, and now she's working on the ECM of Matthew. Again, I'll put a link, hopefully, to this article, or you can probably just do a blog search yourself for it. And you can read the totality of the article. I'm just going to highlight a few things about these interviews with these 5 persons. Towards the end, she says that she's asked, what do you wish more people knew about the INTF or the work you do there? And she says that in the long history of the INTF, which celebrates its 65th anniversary this year, groundbreaking work on the New Testament has been and continues to be pursued in a way that is unparalleled in the world. The institute remains at the forefront of New Testament studies, pioneering numerous groundbreaking projects in areas such as manuscript studies, critical editions, and digital humanities. And so when you have an academic institute, of course, they're going to be involved in research and pioneering work and groundbreaking discoveries. But one of the critiques that we've given before, though, is when the church gives stewardship of the Bible to the academy, the church is interested in conserving the tradition, acknowledging what is truth, and then conserving it. And then once we find what is true, we establish what is true. We don't need any groundbreaking changes to it or pioneering work to alter it. And so there's a fundamental disconnect between the way the church, I think, looks at its text and the way the academy does. And I think that's very evident in her answer. What is her all-time favorite critical edition? The Nestle Aland 28th edition, on whose revision I worked intensively. Of course, that would be her favorite. The second person who is highlighted, and I think is the only person who is an American, is Dr. Megan Burnett. And her interview is perhaps of most interest because she is really the only one of the 5 who talks to any degree about her spiritual life. And she's the only one who identifies herself as a Christian. So let's look at the interview with Dr. Burnett. Tell us about your academic background and what brought you to the INTF. She says, I studied biblical studies, first a BA at Southwest Baptist University, and then an MA and PhD at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, where I wrote my dissertation, Codex Washingtonianus, an analysis of the textual affiliations of the Freer Gospels manuscript published by Gorgias in 2022. So she's a pretty much freshly minted PhD, relatively new PhD, or just had her dissertation published a couple of years ago. She's obviously has a Southern Baptist background. She went to one of the 6 Southern Baptist seminaries, and I think Southwest Baptist University is a Baptist college. She says, after graduating, I saw a position funded jointly by the German Bible Society and INTF as a research fellow for the hand editions of the Greek New Testament. This 3-year postdoc position was previously held by Dora Panella. I was excited at the prospect of working at the INTF because it is the premier institute for New Testament textual criticism, and I wanted to pursue this career. And I'm sure that they were happy to see a woman who had a credentialed PhD. And so she's doing postdoctoral work there. And she's asked, what specific projects are you working on? She says, my primary task is to revise the NA edition, implementing new information for the ECM as it becomes available for the forthcoming 29th edition. We're still waiting for that 29th edition. I thought it was going to come out in 2024, but the year keeps hurtling along. It's August, and maybe it won't be till 2025. She says, I updated the text and apparatus of Mark and Revelation. The book of Acts was done primarily by Dora, which means the NA29 will contain major updates to these 3 books. So we're about to have major updates. They're going to come. The 28th edition had major updates to the Catholic epistles, and now we're about to get major updates to Mark and Revelation and Acts. Apart from these changes, further changes will appear in the NA29 are more cosmetic. For example, the NA and the UBS Greek New Testament will no longer use letters to signify majuscules, utilizing the Gregory Aland numbers instead. This is interesting. Apparently, when we get the NA29, it's not going to use the Aleph to refer to Codex Sinaiticus, nor the A to refer to Alexandrinus, or the B to refer to Vaticanus, but it's going to use the Gregory Aland numbers. So Sinaiticus will be 01, Alexandrinus will be 02, Vaticanus will be 03, etc. So that is indeed a change that is coming down the path to us when the NA29 comes out. She says, besides revising the NA, I also attend the NA and UBS Greek New Testament editorial meetings and take the meeting minutes. So she's the recorder for the editorial meetings when they are looking over and making decisions about what ought to be in the text that will then later be translated. And she says it has been fascinating to see the decision-making processes of the editors firsthand. Let's go on down. Again, you can go back and read all of it for yourself. I think, again, hers is interesting because she does give us some insights into her spiritual perceptions of what working on the text means. She's asked, what do you like about working at the INTF/doing textual criticism? She says, I became interested in biblical studies when I underwent a crisis of my Christian faith as a young college student at Southwest Baptist University. And so she's going to talk about, she had a crisis of her faith when she first encountered, I'm assuming, modern historical critical methodological approach to the study of the Bible. Of course, we know that that is jarring for many persons. For many persons, it means that they eventually end up jettisoning the faith, like Bart Ehrman. But for her, I think she's going to say, oh, this helped me. This helped me so much to hang on to my faith. She says, it was there that my professors introduced me to a whole new way of understanding the Bible. See, probably going in, she was probably a pre-critical believer who accepted things like the providential preservation of Scripture. Then her ideas were jarred by that, but her professors were able to ameliorate those concerns. And she says, then things began to become alive for me. The historical character of the New Testament went from being people of ye old ancient days. Of course, she has to throw in sort of a manufactured KJV sounding type term. She had this outdated way of looking at ye old ancient days. And that all changed when she was introduced to the modern method, so she could understand people of a concrete time and place with distinct cultures and worldviews. So she was able to find windows into the ancient cultures of the past through the Bible. But again, this is even before she discovered textual criticism. She says, I didn't become interested in textual criticism until seminary. There, Dr. Bill Warren, who had been very influential in my formation as a scholar, set up an excellent research center called the Center for New Testament Textual Studies. I started transcribing a few manuscripts, and it all snowballed from there. Ironically, I did some introductory work on textual criticism in undergraduate studies, and I found it to be quite boring at the time. It seemed so esoteric and removed from understanding the New Testament. It wasn't until I started engaging with the manuscripts that I realized how important and practical it all is. Either the manuscript evidence says one thing or it says something else. That clarity appeals to me. Of all the biblical study disciplines, textual criticism is the closest to a hard science. I think that's an interesting observation. A lot of times in the introductory textbooks on textual criticism or history of textual criticism, they'll talk about how it's both an art and a science. And there's one sort of younger, credentialed PhD totem critic who's fond of saying, he has a background in chemistry, and in chemistry, like to measure things. And what you're doing is with these manuscripts, you're just measuring and weighing things, and you're using just weights and measures and so forth. Well, the truth is that textual criticism is not a hard science. It's a very subjective experience, and it's not like studying chemistry or engineering or mathematics. It's a very subjective experience. The proof of its subjectivity is the fact that there's no consensus among those who practice it. The reasoned eclecticism very often as to what how a text should read. If it were just a matter of hard science, they could study that and they would be able perhaps to come up with some kind of definitive, objective declaration about it. But there's much subjectivity. A person I was talking to recently who is someone who holds a PhD in the sciences, they said this is creeping into the hard sciences. There's often a lack of objectivity and there's a lot more subjectivity in the scientific fields. Well, this is certainly very true in textual criticism. But she's giving sort of maybe, this is the enthusiastic, newly minted PhD who's giving an apologetic for why textual criticism is so wonderful and why it's so valuable and so forth. Of course, she's put a lot of time, a lot of money probably into gaining this degree. And so she's being an apologist for this discipline that she has entered into. She says, concerning my job specifically, I have been intrigued by what exactly goes into the creation of the critical editions. One thing I appreciate about textual criticism is the work is similar no matter where one goes in the world. I did my studies in the USA and then moved to Germany to do my professional work. Though I certainly experienced some cultural differences, I found that my work as a text critic remains largely unchanged. So there's wonderful universal culture of modern academia, and whether you're doing it in the US or Germany, and boy, those are two really radically different academic places, aren't they? Whether you're doing text criticism in Germany or whether you're doing it in the United States, whether if you're using the reason, modern reason, eclecticism, strange thing is you come up with the same things. So she says, what do you wish more people knew about the INTF? Or she's asked, what do you wish more people knew about the INTF or the work you do there? She says, it's a pet peeve of mine, but textual criticism isn't the same as biblical translation. So apparently she tells people she works at the INTF and people wrongly think she's involved in translation. She's working on the text, not the translation of it. But that seems like a pretty understandable question someone might ask, because it's from these texts that translations are made. Whenever I tell people what I do, they often say, oh, so you do translation work. I try to explain that I do the work that needs to happen before the translation can start, but they often still don't understand. Some people are so, silly. A lot of folks are simply used to having the Bible around and having spent little time thinking about where it came from. Well, that is true, but there is sort of a, I don't know, kind of a sense of these crazy people in the pew don't understand their Bibles, and they don't understand the expertise that it takes to be able to read your Bible. How could they just possibly simply read the Bible, the Bibles that they have? She continues, certain sectors of the community also have a particular bugbear about the phrase initial text, in German, the Ausgangstext, and think it somehow denigrates the textual authority of the New Testament. And again, she is quite the apologist. She's the only one of the five that offers this type of apologetic. And maybe it's because she comes from an evangelical Southern Baptist background. She feels like she's got to defend. The other ones aren't going to try to defend it. This would probably be something they would think would be, unnecessary, but she is. And maybe it's because in the back of her mind, she realizes that there is something that will be challenging to ordinary believers about this. And particularly this term, Ausgangstext. You're not trying to get the original. You think that the original text, the autograph, cannot be reconstructed. The initial text is only the oldest text you think you might be able to reconstruct. Maybe you can get it back to the 4th century, the 3rd century, but there's a gap between that initial text and what Matthew actually wrote or what Paul actually wrote. But she's trying to allay anyone's concerns about that. People get these silly people. This becomes a bugbear for them. Well, maybe they have an authentic concern about this for a reason. Maybe it is disconcerting that the stewards of the Bible are saying we don't actually know what the Bible is. She continues, as a committed Christian. Now she's really trying to allay our fears here, the fears of the readers. And she's beginning here by taking the high ground and saying, well, I am a committed Christian. See, I'm a committed Christian and I can still do modern textual criticism. She says, as a committed Christian, I have no problem with this term, the initial text. And no, it is not at all intended to weaken the authority of the Bible as the living Word of God. And my question is, she's claiming an authority here. And the authority is, as a Christian, I can tell you it's not intended. Now, it may weaken someone's sense of the authority of the Word of the Bible as the living Word of God, but it's not intended to. And my question is, by what authority can you make that claim? What if there are people out there for whom this method does weaken their sense of the authority of the Word of God? And actually, maybe there are some people who have a very different view of the Bible, who do not see it as an authoritative book or an infallible book. And maybe they do see this research in part opening the eyes of the fundamentalist Christian, so they can see that the human parts of the Bible and so forth. But anyway, she continues, in my experience, my colleagues at the INTF, boy, this is really hard science. In my experience, in my subjective experience, my colleagues at the INTF have a high respect for the New Testament and for the work they do as text critics. So again, this is a very apologetic, the most apologetic of the five by far. And she's saying, listen, stop criticizing us. According to my subjective experience, my colleagues have a high respect for. Notice she doesn't say, my colleagues believe in the infallibility of Scripture. My colleagues are all confessional Christians. No, she says they treat, not only do they treat the Bible, they treat their work with respect. They have great respect for their academic work. I know this isn't meant to allay the fears of some readers, but in fact, I think it starts to demonstrate maybe why some of us have concerns about this. We'll come back to this again at the end. Do you have advice for others or specifically for women? You wouldn't want to give advice to mere men, but specifically for women wanting to enter this field. She says, learning to do textual criticism is like learning to drive a car. You can read all the books you want, but you don't learn to drive until you get behind the wheel. If you want to do textual criticism, you have to work with the manuscripts themselves. Reading books about manuscripts will not be enough. And, again, we get this sense that we sometimes hear, especially in these younger scholars, this idea that they now have some great expertise and that they can sit down and look at manuscripts, that they're really doing textual criticism. And the people who aren't doing that day in and day out, they really don't understand the text. They really don't have any ground to speak into the wisdom of the whole modern textual research enterprise. So again, hers was quite interesting. Dr. Megan Burnett's was probably the most interesting of all of them. But let's rush on and look at the last three. We've looked at Dr. Lohmann and Dr. Burnett. There are three more women who make up at least 50% of the INTF staff. And the next one is Dr. Annette Huffmeier, Dr. Annette Huffmeier. And she's asked the first question, tell us about your academic background and what brought you to the INTF. Notice the first question, all these is going to be, what is your academic background? Which tells us something about the priority of interest for the interviewer. She says, I studied to be a secondary school teacher in ancient Greek, history, German, and mathematics, but I actually only worked at a school during my teacher training period. Since I really enjoyed delving deeply into academic topics, I decided to pursue a PhD from 1996 to 1999. My doctoral thesis was called Pythagorean Sayings in Porphyry's Life of Pythagoras. And so, again, like Dr. Lohmann, whose specialty was in Greek Platonic works, her specialty was in the writings of Porphyry and his Life of Pythagoras. So her academic training wasn't in biblical studies, but in classical studies, basically. She also mentions, where was it? In 2010, Gerd Mink at the INTF was due to retire, and I successfully obtained his position. So Gerd Mink is the one who is the person who came up with the CBGM. And when he retired in 2010, she is the person who now is in his position. And she says, my position is split between teaching at the Protestant faculty and researching at the INTF. So she is also a teaching theologian. I'm assuming she has a Lutheran background. She never tells us that, but she's teaching in the faculty there at Munster and then working also at the INTF. Let's see, she says, each October I teach an intensive Greek course for beginners. And then she talked about how some of the graduates go on to work as student assistants. They work in transcription, patristics, or Some have worked at the Bible Museum. Sometimes people think of the Bible Museum it is owned, I think, and operated by evangelicals, but oddly enough, it also is involved in trying to get the academic experts involved in the study and research and so forth there. Let's see. She says, last paragraph there, at the INTF, I can work independently, utilizing my skill in classic ancient Greek, but I also enjoy collaboration with colleagues. We're part of a larger interdisciplinary project, which everyone knows they can't be successful on their own, and that they stand on the shoulders of their predecessors. The opportunity to collaborate internationally is also a particularly rewarding aspect of this work. And then let's see, her next question is, what specific projects are you working on at the INTF? How does your work directly affect the critical editions? She says, I work almost exclusively on the ECM. So when you see these ECM editions coming out, as Revelation just came out, you know that this is something in part that's been worked on by Dr. Annette Huffmeier. She says, my primary tasks are creating and refining the apparatus, coordinating the versional and patristic contributions to it, working on the editorial team, a lot of proofreading, giving presentations on the ECM, both locally and internationally, and representing the INTF in various external committees, like the International Greek New Testament Project and the Society for Biblical Literature. She tells us, again, a little bit about what she is at work with. She says, I also work extensively to refine the apparatus. Later on, she's going to say, as a member of the ECM editorial committee, I am one of 5 that votes on textual decisions and uses the help of the CBGM to do this. So this is really interesting. If you are using the ECM, you're looking here at Dr. Annette Huffmeier, who is one of 5 people in the world who is making the important decisions about what should be in the scholarly Greek New Testament, and then that becomes the basis for modern translations. So this person, Dr. Huffmeier, certainly has a very important, very influential position. Let's just go down here. She says, they ask her, what do you wish more people knew about the INTF or the work you do there? She said, how hard we all work together, how we struggle over every textual decision that is made. Each decision is scrutinized extensively, and we strive to remain objective and keep ideology out of it as much as possible. Now, that's an interesting statement. It's interesting on 2 levels. One is, do you really think that one could possibly remain objective and keep their personal ideology out of it? First of all, she hasn't told us much about what her personal ideology is. What do you think the personal ideology and worldview of Dr. Annette Huffmeier is exactly? But wait a second, she's telling us she just tries to be strictly objective. Kind of reminds me of the famous comment that Tommy Wasserman, the Swedish Baptist modern text critic, made on the Evangelical Textual Criticism blog when he said, I want to do textual criticism as if God does not exist. And so she's telling us, I try to keep ideology out of it as much as possible. So first of all, is that possible? Don't you think her ideology leaks into this? But then secondly, is that even preferable? Shouldn't we have people working with the Bible who have confessional commitments to it? How would it be if you went to your church and you said, I just want to hear my pastor talk about the Bible, and I want to hear him talk about it objectively, and I want him to keep his theology out of it. So is it possible that could happen? And would it, in what world would it be preferable for that to happen? I don't think it's preferable, actually. One of the reasons I defend the traditional Protestant text is because the men who were the stewards of it were confessional believers. They were Protestant Christians, Protestant scholars, whether that was Stephanus, whether it was Beza, whether it was the Elzevirs, those who were publishing it. Let's see. She continues. She says, unfortunately, a common fallacy is that our work is largely done by computers. It's not that the CBGM is not the CBGM that automatically generates the many thousands of textual decisions behind our critical editions. We humans do that. And she makes a valid point there. Again, I think sometimes this point is overstated. Yes, certainly, we understand that the CBGM is not a black box and you put the figures in and it spits out a text. That's part of our critique of it. It has the veneer of being somehow scientifically objective because it's using these computer generated algorithms and so forth. But in the end, there are decisions that are made by editors, as has always been the case. And so subjectivity is definitely part of the process. But anyway, she makes that point. Of course, we are supported by digital tools in this endeavor, but our task as scholars with these thousands of textual decisions is carefully to weigh every single one. Let's see. Do you have advice for others or specifically for women? Men, don't listen to this. She says, don't let yourself be discouraged on your career path, etc. So we've got three, and let's do two more. And I may not look as deeply at these last two. Not to say that they're unimportant. You can go back and read some of this for yourself. The fourth of these women at the INTF, groundbreaking women, is Dr. Katrin Maria Landefeld. Tell us about your academic background and what brought you to the INTF. She said, I studied Latin, Greek, and theology and completed my doctorate in classical Greek philology. Again, it's interesting that so far we've seen three of the four we've looked at thus far had their background in classics, not in New Testament, not in biblical studies. She says her work in Greek philology involved writing my dissertation on prayer in the works of Epictetus. And Epictetus, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, was the Stoic philosopher, the slave philosopher. And so her specialty was prayer in this Stoic philosopher. She goes on and talks about how she saw a job advertised to work at INTF, and she got to know the work of Marie-Louise Lohmann. And then she worked in the Patristic department for a year. So now she's getting some training in the Christianity side. And she notes that in 2023, I returned to the Patristics department and now work together with David Vasquez. She's writing her second dissertation, her habilitation document thesis on a commentary on Augustine's De Musica, Book 6, in which Augustine combines music theory with theology. So her background was in classical Greek philology, but she's since done work and is doing a PhD in patristics, basically. She's asked what specific projects you're working on. And so it sounds like is kind of is one of, or maybe the patristics specialists at the INTF. And of course, the CBGM doesn't make direct use of evidence from the patristics, but the ECM includes patristic information. And of course, the editors, as Dr. Huffmeier points out, will not just accept things that come from the CBGM, those digital tools, but they also use their own subjective interpretations and analysis. And I assume that incorporates looking at some patristic evidence from the church fathers. She says, let's see, she says, my task is to collect and evaluate these patristic New Testament citations and assign them to variant readings in the ECM apparatus. Later, she says, as new editions of the NA appear, the patristic citations will be revised based on the ECM. So if you have one of the handbooks today, you know it often, when it cites a variant, after it lists the manuscripts, Greek manuscripts and versions, it will often list, well, this is cited in Eusebius of Caesarea, or this is cited by Clement of Alexandria. And so she's working on the revision of those patristic citations in these various handbooks. She's asked, why did you decide to pursue this field? I got to know INTF while studying in Munster. I was fascinated by the combination of theology and classical languages being utilized there. What do you like about working at the INTF? She says, first and foremost, the team is great. So there's a lot of cheering on the team, the collegial work there. She's asked, what is your all-time favorite critical edition of the New Testament? Of course, it's the ECM. And then the fifth and the final person, whereas the previous scholar that we looked at, Dr. Landefeld, is sort of the patristic specialist. The last one of these, Dr. Katharina Sandmeyer, she is the Coptic specialist, apparently, on this team. And so let's look a little bit about hers. Again, we will not go maybe read as much as we did as some of the others, but let's see what it says about her. Tell us about your academic background. Again, that's always got to be the first question, is what are your academic credentials to do this type of work? And she says, I studied Egyptology, Coptology, and ancient Near Eastern studies at the University of Munster. By the way, a lot of these, this is an interesting thing about just in some ways, the lack of academic diversity is reflected here. Almost everybody comes in-house out of Munster. And then these people are the stewards for the text that's used by people all over the world. She says, these disciplines offer a joint BA program here in Munster. When I started, I was still undecided. I took courses in Coptic language and culture, did an MA focused on Coptology, and decided to make it my profession. She did an MA thesis in 2014. Then there was an opening at INTF, and it soon became a second home. She says she was lucky because jobs in this field are rare. One of my main interests during my studies was book culture and codicology. The New Testament and its witnesses have a lot to do with that. I was able to enrich my area of specialty and be employed while doing so. I started as a student assistant, working part-time while I wrote my PhD on Coptic and Greek punctuation and segmentation, just finished. Since 2022, I'm a full-time researcher and the heart of the Coptic department of the INTF. So this young woman, obviously very educated, very accomplished young woman, she is the heart of the Coptic studies that are incorporated into these critical, modern, scholarly critical editions of the Greek New Testament that are being produced by Munster. I'm going to go ahead and skip to the end. Again, you can read the rest of the interview with her, but I want to go to what is added right here at the end. I'm guessing this is what Paulson and Leggett, who wrote the article, they add, we hope you've enjoyed these short profiles about the talented women contributing to the critical editions in a field historically dominated by men. Boy, we'll talk about that in a moment, just how that reflects this modern zeitgeist, spirit of this age, that there needs to be a correction because men have been dominating in this field. We are privileged to collaborate with such skilled and dedicated women. We extend our heartfelt gratitude for their years of hard work and commitment and hope these scholars will inspire future generations and particularly more women. So don't, you young men, don't be inspired by this. Just mainly you young women out there, be inspired by it, to pursue the field of New Testament textual criticism. If you're a young man who's inspired, well, you're probably not going to get that postdoc because we mainly want to have, young women who are inspired to work on this. Well, so this was the article, and again, this is the article that I suggested that so-called conservative and confessional men, evangelicals, should read carefully and evaluate the worldview that is evident in the contemporary holders, custodians of the modern critical texts of the Greek New Testament. And as they point out in that introduction, I mean, they tell us plainly, a paper copy of it here, that their institute is renowned worldwide, and the editions they put out, the Nesolon, the UBS Greek New Testament, the ECM, they provide the basis for almost all modern New Testament translations around the globe. And so they know how important this is. Here, though, are four worldview concerns that I would put forward from those of us who are conservative evangelicals, confessionally reformed. Here are the four things. First of all, the entire approach reflected in this article reflects the sort of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion vibe that we find in the secular world in 2024. We obviously see in this article the inroads of modern feminism. It seems strange to me, honestly, to be celebrating the fact that 50% of the staff at INTF is female. And it's almost cringeworthy. Shouldn't there simply be a concern that persons who would be doing this type of work would be competent and qualified? But instead, no, it's got to have this just gender angle on it. And we have to celebrate the fact that this is a great accomplishment that 50% of the staff now are women. And again, I said it's cringeworthy. It kind of reminds me of what we're seeing in a lot of like the entertainment field, or the movie industry will take some classic film and they'll recast maybe a male character with a female character. And this is some kind of, girl power type of thing. And so, again, it's just cringy because it just reflects so much the spirit of this age. Second of four concerns, the main focus in these interviews we can see with these five women is on their academic credentials. And notice that four of the five have their expertise, it seems, primarily in more secular type of literature. They weren't people who did their primary work in biblical studies. There was the lady from the United States, the Southern Baptist woman, Dr. Burnett. She did a degree on Codex W, but the others had backgrounds in things like the writings of Plato, or Stoic writings like Epictetus, and the writings of Platonic authors like Porphyry in his life of Pythagoras, or I guess I don't know what the Coptic literature would have been, but so there seems to be more of a background in in non-Christian classical literature as opposed to Christian writings. And again, I find this interesting that's really the primary credential for being a steward of the New Testament is understanding classical literature. There's a place for understanding classical literature. I'm not downplaying that as an academic discipline, but the Bible is not merely a work of human literature. And I think that's the thing is there's inherently a lack of distinction between secular literature and sacred literature. My question is, do you handle the New Testament the same way you handle the life of Pythagoras? Do you handle the epistles of Paul in the same way that you handle the prayers of Epictetus? Isn't there something different for the Christian between sacred literature and secular literature? Third concern, there was largely no specific discussion in these so-called interviews with these 5 persons about personal faith, about confessional beliefs, or church affiliation. And again, the one exception to that was the comments that were made by Dr. Burnett. But even then, they were, I had a crisis in my faith as a committed Christian. But what is her confessional background exactly? I guessed Southern Baptist, but I don't know. I mean, we could talk to someone who's a Mormon and they could say, I'm a committed Christian. We could talk to a mainline Protestant and they could say, as a committed Christian, I believe X, Y, and Z. There has to be more definition. What is your confessional stance? What is your confessional position? And again, 4 out of 5 said nothing about this. They said nothing about I'm a Christian. I belong to the Lutheran Church. I'm committed to the Augsburg Confession, or I'm an agnostic. I'm a secularist. What are their confessional beliefs exactly? That's a question. And then 4th worldview question: there was no mention or consideration of what I could call ecclesiastical authority. And this is related to the 3rd question. Certainly, again, with all due respect, and if someone might hear my comments, they might think, oh, this guy's he's just misogynistic. He doesn't like women and so forth. And that's not the case. I believe the Bible has a very high view of men and women. We're both image bearers, but I also believe that there is a distinction. There's not sameness between men and women. We are gloriously different. And so one of those differences is that only qualified men might serve as officers of the church. And so from my perspective, if I can say with charity and respect, and I hope humility, none of these women could serve as officers in biblically faithful churches. And it is the officers of biblically faithful churches who are given the responsibility of being stewards of the preaching and teaching of the faith. And I think that should include things like acknowledging the proper text. I thought about what the Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 4:1. He said, let a man so account of us as of the ministers of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Paul was an apostle. He had an extraordinary office. We don't have apostles today. But I think what he said could be said generally of the ministers of Christ, as he calls them here, that they are stewards of the mysteries of God. This was a passage that was often used by our Protestant forefathers to talk about the role of the officers in administering the ordinances, that they are the stewards of the mysteries of God, meaning baptism and the Holy Supper. But I think this could also be applied to the fact that it should be ministers of Christ who are the stewards of the acknowledging the proper text of the scriptures and establishing those. And with all due respect, none of these women would meet the qualifications for having that office, I believe, as the scriptures put that forward. Here's the irony. I want you to think for a second. This is why I put it out on my ex post, and I asked my fellow conservative evangelicals, confessional men, to read this article. Here's the irony. There are traditional men, conservative men out there in evangelical churches, confessional churches, Reformed Baptist churches, Reformed Presbyterian churches. And I see them on Twitter all the time, or on X all the time. They're warning against the inroads of feminism. They are publishing books against critical race theory. They are criticizing wokeism in politics and in education and so forth. They will declare themselves to be staunch complementarians. They will say that, that women should choose to get married and have children and minister in the home and so forth. They will not approve women being ordained to ministry. They will criticize the United Methodist Church for its liberalism and appointing women as bishops and so forth. They will be Southern Baptists who will lament the fact that the so-called law amendment failed at the last SBC meeting. And they will want to remove any women from participation in the Southern Baptist Convention, or they will want to remove churches if they have women pastors. They will be PCA pastors who will be critical of Tim Keller and other more PCA ministers, maybe on the left wing, who want to have women serve in sort of crypto diaconal roles within their churches. They will be Reformed Baptists who will post all day long conservative political memes and who will criticize Big Eva on social media. And they will do this all the while that they have their soon to be updated ESVs in their hand. They see no problem, no disconnect between their criticism of the inroads of feminism and their continued looking to a secular, woke, academic think tank in a German university, which is serving as the steward and custodian of the text of the scriptures that they have, and which will change the text of the scripture and which will change translations that are used in their churches. I don't know if they think it just miraculously comes down out of Munster. Do they have any concern as to who are the persons and what their confessional views, what their worldview views are? If we think, I'm doing a Bible study in our midweek meeting at CRBC, we're working through 1 Timothy, and we're in 1 Timothy 2. Probably next Wednesday, we'll look at this passage, and it'll be interesting. But when you look at 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12, where Paul said, "But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence." And my question is, in light of that passage, can it be that we could have this secular, DEI sensitive think tank basically determining the text of scripture that will be used in churches? Is that consistent with Paul's teaching that he does not suffer a woman to teach nor to usurp authority over the man? Is it right for such persons to take this position of doctrinal authority that has such an impact on the churches? And so this is one of the reasons why I added that little hashtag modern Texit, because I think it's time for faithful, Bible-believing men and women and churches to leave the modern academic text behind. The safest thing that we can do is go back to the traditional text, the Protestant text, that up until the 19th century was used consistently and is still used today consistently by many conservative believers all over the world. It's time for a hashtag modern Texit to take place. And I hope that many will read this article and give it some consideration. I do look forward. I'd love to see some of these men who are confessional. I'd like to see them give a response or give a defense of making use of the Nestle-Aland or the UBS, Greek New Testaments, or the ECM, and defending how it's okay for this to be done, given the worldview that is held by those within this think tank. Well, with that, I'm going to bring this episode to a conclusion. I hope this has been helpful and it will be encouraging to those who are listening. I'll look forward to speaking to you in the next episode of Word Magazine. Till then, take care and may the Lord richly bless you.